we are not the only one in the world facing this challenge.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Red Dot Hot Takes. I'm Hossan Leong. Let us start by introducing our guest for today, Jean. This is Jean Liu. Why don't you tell us about yourself?
Hi, I'm an assistant professor of psychology at Yale and US College. I'm 37 this year and I've spent everything but 2 years, I believe, 35 of those 37 years, either studying or teaching in educational institutions. So education is very close to my heart.
Wow, so you are one of the perfect guests for this episode then. Suhaimi Yusof.
Hey.
You want to tell everybody about yourself?
Yeah, you can actually download my wiki. No. Well, I am a full-time curious human being, which I got on board or went into the broadcasting world.
Yeah.
So I went to becoming a radio broadcaster,
Right.
producer, presenter, TV, and then stage show, and you name it.
Like as if you're not busy enough.
Busy enough.
Speaking of busy, we have Minister Chan Chun Sing here with
Hello,
us
everyone.
to perhaps talk about the education and lifelong learning aspect of the equip pillar. I got that right this time. Right? Okay. No, the reason why we're doing this series is because there are 6 pillars that's part of the Forward SG exercise. Now, I'm not going to try it now because I'll probably get it wrong again. But Suhaimi, do you know what the 6 pillars are?
Oh, yes, of course.
Wow. Here we go.
Empower, equip.
Mm.
Today when we're living in this kind of generation, sharing is caring. So I don't want to sound very smart. So the other 4, I leave it to the other 2 panelists.
Sabo.
Well,
There's build and there's unite.
Very good.
Awesome.
There's care.
There's care
Good.
and Stuart.
And Stuart.
The cheat sheet.
Sitting next to Hosan.
I'm
is
sure they
very
all need a
Yeah.
10-year series for this.
Yeah.
No,
Actually-
but this is the thing, because I think when the 6 pillars were announced by DPM Wong, a lot of people were going like, but what's this all about, you know? And because we're talking about building a cohesive social compact,
Yep.
which is also, with the first episode, we asked DPM Wong, what is that all about? What does it mean? And so the equip pillar that comes under the Forward SG exercise talks about education, of course, equipping our citizens to go out into the world and in Singapore as well, to work as well. So perhaps, Min Chan, could you explain a little bit what goes under this pillar of equip?
Actually, the equip pillar is, as you say, is talking about how we equip our people for the future, which is going to be quite different from the past. But beyond that, actually, we had what we call a step 0 before we even talk about how we equip our people. And that is, how do we define success for our people? You see, in the past, I think a lot of us tend to define success maybe by the 4 C's, the 5 C's, or whatever we call it. But is that the only way we define success, by material means? Or are there other perspectives that we should embrace? For example, success can mean that we bring to fruition the full potential of every of our children. And everyone is different. So success to different individuals can be defined differently. Right? That could be one way. But there's one most important concept that we are trying to push in this exercise. And that is that today, I think too often we keep looking at success of the education system as the first 15 years of one's life, how well we do in exams, how well we do in school. But the real definition of success is not what we achieve in the first 15 years of our schooling life, but what we achieve beyond the first 15 years in the next 50 years of our adult lives. Do we keep learning? Do we keep contributing? Do we keep enjoying what we do? That is, I think, the real success. So if we move from the first 15 years to the next 50 years, then I think we have quite a different perspective on how we equip our people. But it's that process of having to keep learning and equipping ourselves with the skills to learn. And that is important.
Yeah, because we talk about success, right? And success is so subjective.
Right.
Everybody has a different standard level, definition. So, Jean, in your opinion, what does that mean then? I mean, what the government is trying to do you think it is moving the right direction that way? Can it be done?
Yeah, I think I wear two hats. I wear one as an educator, of course, but I also have 3 young children going through the school system myself. And I think if you talk to different people, you get a different perspective. So if you talk to the schools, they'll say, we're really doing a lot. And they are. I think Minister will share some of the things that, there have been changed, very, very large changes to the school systems over the years. But then if you talk to the parents on the other side of things, then parents have a different perspective. They say that, yeah, I understand all of that. I understand that we have different models of success. But, there are still things that are institutionalized, right? That, until all pieces move together, where, employers start to think differently all the way, to scholarships think differently. And, all these different things start to move together, then we can also start changing our mindsets. So it's a little bit of everyone has to shift in some sense.
I thought that's a great example when Jean made the point about everyone of us have to move together. So for example, broadening the definition of success. We say that don't just look at academics, but also look beyond academics. Look at the character of the person. Look at the kind of value systems that they have. Look at the curiosity. But who is the one that's going to look at all this, right? It has to be the family, having to recognize that every kid is a unique individual and we should try to bring out the best in him or her rather than try to shoehorn him or her into a particular mold which may not fit him or her. Then we also need the industry people to say that, well, I'm going to look at people beyond the grades, right?
Absolutely.
Because in the past, I think we try to look for one yardstick and say that, everything is summarized in this grade, this GPA. But that is just a generic marker of ability. It doesn't tell you very specifically what the person is good at. In fact, very often in many of these progressive employment practices, when you go for an interview, they will give you a problem to solve which don't yet have a solution. They want to know how you can frame tomorrow's challenges and try to come up with new and creative ideas, not just by yourself, but also by collaborating with other people from different backgrounds. So you see, these are all different skill sets that we need our future generation to have. Or I wouldn't say future generation, I would say the current generation
have.
have.
You gotta do it now.
You got to do it now, you see. And our people have a different challenge. It's not just about knowing what's around. In fact, they will be inundated with all the information. The new skill sets I think that we are trying to teach in the schools and the universities. How do you find the information? How do you discern whether they make sense, they are real, they are fake? Then how do you synthesize the information to create something new?
And apply it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask Suhaimi, because success to us, back then when you told your folks that you were gonna be an entertainer, and same with me, it was like,
I had to do it in secrecy.
wow, you in secret,
just
how?
imagine so if my father asked me, it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a joker. Can you imagine, like, the first thing we'll do is throw me out of the window. I think back then the situation was absolutely, totally different. And I think touching on the dynamics or the dynamism of things that's going on right now, back then it was quite easy for us to like hold on to certain things that we've learned, and then it could actually survive the next 5 to 10 years. Because it's quite stable and we could use that, hone the skills and, really milk it until it comes to its fruition. But today, the fundamental question would be is something like, if we learn something, the turnaround, how long would that last? How fast can the school or the institution or educational institution turn around? How quick?
Okay, all right.
Because we're not talking about Titanic ship. We're talking about Speedy Gonzales. All those boats are moving quite fast because we're exposed to the
world's
global
evolving
world now, right?
really, really quickly. And in terms of education, Singapore always has been on the forefront, always been number one. But we are trying to improve such that our society can move together. And as Min Chan had said, collectively, we all need to be responsible, right? So on that note, we are going to start our hot take. Okay, our red dot hot take. We are asking too much of our school teachers. Too much, all right? We've had news about teachers doing a lot and they have so much to do, right? They got to deal with the students, the teaching them. They have to break up the fights. They got admin stuff to do. They have to deal with the parents, okay?
But it's one of those things, you see, I always share with my teachers and they share with me, you see. Says nowadays, truly speaking, we have more teachers, compared to the number of students. The ratios have certainly improved. But why is it that we all feel so so busy? That's where the partnership between the parents and the school have to come in. I think that needs to be that mutual trust, you see. And then we need to give space to the children to grow. We also need to give space to the teachers to manage the children accordingly. And sometimes I think as parents and even as a school system, I think sometimes we are guilty of what I call over-providing. Because whenever there's a problem, we want to rush there with a solution to provide for the kids.
I don't think there's always a push and pull factor here, because like one is over-providing. The other one, if we don't provide, I think it also provide some problem area there. But I think at the end of the day is, are we asking too much of our school teachers? I think that question is like, addressing as if like we're in a competition. I think the competition mindset sets the tone here. That sometimes we, as parents, we don't look at our kids as kids, but we look at them as trophies.
Commodities, is it?
And then the pressure, of course, it trickles down to the teachers.
I want to ask you, Suhaimi, so how did you, what happened at home for you when you were bringing up your kids and making them study? How was that like?
I think what parents do, we were the first teachers anyway. So the first thing I told them was like, go to school, mix around with more friends. Socialize, because that's what I did back then. The whole infrastructure is to socialize, so we become more friends. And then friends will become friends. And imagine some of your friends, some of them, who knows, might grow up to be a minister, to be an entertainer. So it's like a whole bunch of classmates. That's the whole fundamental idea. And then we all learn through playing, right? So I told my kids, number one, I will never give you tuition classes. I will not provide tuition, so you have to learn on your own. So I actually had tuition classes at the beginning, like first and second year. Then after that, I scrapped off the whole idea because...
How old was that when you...
They were like primary 3, primary 4, and then I decided like, what is this? It's like, why am I like giving a little bit more? It's not boost the shot, but it's a I don't know. I'm just putting too much pressure on that.
Sure.
Yeah. So then I want them to enjoy, enjoy. So the keyword was to enjoy the learning.
But it's very common, you see. I think in the past, we all went through this. We all get compared.
Yeah.
But we only get compared once a year. During Hari Raya, Chinese New Year, when you go and visit your relatives, right? Like,
yes!
Hey, Bang, which school you are in?
Yeah.
What do you score?
Yeah.
But that was once upon a time. But today, actually, the children and the parents face a different set of pressures. With all these websites and all these things that you keep watching other people's social media's feed, you are constantly being compared. We all post the nicest, the most beautiful picture.
Sure.
But in that process, what we are unconsciously doing is that we are normalizing the extremes. And then after a while, if you are just being normal, average, you start to feel like something is wrong with me.
Yeah.
Like, why is everybody enjoying such a good meal, dressed in this nice fancy outfit, going to fancy places, and I'm just doing my homework?
I know, like we say, it's all responsibility that is shared. Okay, so let's go back to the fundamentals now. How are we dealing with this problem? Let's talk about it. It's a problem. I think it's a problem.
Yep. Right.
How are we dealing with it?
So I think we need to attack it from different angles, just as you mentioned.
Okay.
From the individual level, I think we need to give our people the sense of confidence that actually what is most important to the individual is not so much whether they ace one particular exam, they surpass somebody in an exam. So my mantra to the students is, it's more important to keep surpassing yourself for life than to try and surpass someone else for an exam.
I got one question. In relation to that, so does it mean, representing 3/4 of my former classmates who are teachers now, does it mean that they can relax a little bit and their KPI loosen up a bit?
I told the teachers during the work plan seminar, I say that, sometimes we have to let go of a bit and give the children space. And at the same time, me as the minister, I will back you up. Because I don't want you to go and get so involved in this micromanagement, but they are always afraid whether they are answerable to the parents. So the example that I have shared before, one of the school told me that I have to deploy teachers along the corridors. I say, why? He says, canteen? I know, canteen you see whether people queue up properly. He say, in case the children fall down.
What?
I was like, wait. If the children fall down, I said, but I thought even if you stand along the corridor, the children might still fall down, right? They said, no. But at least if something happens, we are there to know what happens. So I said, why do you say that? And the truth be told is that he says that we have incidents before whereby
goodness.
people, children fell down and people demanded answers from us.
The parents
Wow.
lah.
So then it adds a certain very negative culture whereby there's no trust within the system. But we must have a bit of give and take because there's no way that the teachers can be responsible for everything at every moment, right? So sometimes things happen. We will try our best to take care of the students and that's our duty of care. And we must continue to do that. But where you find that balance, I think that's very important.
Yeah, I was going to jump in as an educator and say that, teachers really do best when they are passionate and can bring that passion in the classroom and are not bogged down by all these administrative things. But actually, I was wondering if, to what extent do teachers still have that kind of bandwidth to actually still create and bring that kind of fun lesson plans. I'm lucky as a university professor. I only teach 2 classes. It's 2 3-hour classes that keep me up all night. But that gives me a
stand along the corridors to watch
No, I don't have to stand along the
Better
corridors.
not.
But that gives me a lot of room to plan fun activities, experiential learning. We bring people on field trips to the Trick Eye Museum in order to learn about cognitive illusion. So we bring the classroom to life, and we have a lot of that bandwidth because of the structure of universities. But whenever I talk to my teaching friends, very similar to you, they often say that that bandwidth is hard, right? That they would like to be able to explore and be creative and encourage the students to be creative.
Right.
So that's why we say that go for quality, not quantity. In fact, recently I visited a school. It's quite interesting. I asked the children, so how's your homework? What's the work look like? He says, we would like to have harder questions, but fewer questions. Because they want to be challenged. So the question is, how do we then plan that so-called more challenging experience according to the needs? Because every class is different, every school is different, but the teacher actually knows best. They know the students best, and then therefore they can design the curriculum in such a way that stretches the potential of their children. That's why sometimes people ask, why is that this school and this school, they teach the things differently? That's because the students are different. And that's where I think we need that in-depth understanding of the student's ability and that deep sense of trust that the teacher is what we call the last mile person that can close the gap.
So are there steps being done right now to alleviate this asking too much of our school teachers so so that they can do what they do best, which is teach?
I think we are doing 2 things at the same time.
Okay.
One is to make sure that we use technology, simplify all the administrative processes, and more interestingly, to use technology to have what we call the self-paced learning. So for example, mathematics, you can stretch the ability of the child just by gamifying the subject. So if you are good, you just keep stretching a bit more. If you're not so good, you can continue to revise. And even for some of the languages, when people learn to pronounce words and speak, there's another part I think that we need to build the trust between the parents and the teachers and the partnership between the parents and the teachers. And we have seen very positive examples where some of our schools have very good, very positive parent support groups. They don't just come in to give suggestions to the teachers, but they actually commit themselves to help the teachers to conduct certain life lessons, if you like, to share their experiences beyond the school environment. And that helps to complement one another rather than to expect the teachers to do everything at one go.
Will there be like skills, courses, futures for parents? Because not students and teachers now.
We might go into that in just a while.
Actually, the parents, they also share amongst themselves because many of the parents are actually in the workplace environment.
Yes.
Right? So they might be with some progressive employers that are looking for new and different skill sets, right? And then they can also help to do some of the career counseling for the students themselves who knows that, are you sure that you want to go into this line? Do you have this interest in this area? Otherwise, you might just be following other people and it may not be something that you really like to do.
Yeah, because I think probably is the risk-taking part here whereby, parents can also take a step back, but then the risk factor is always like, if we take a step back, because it's so results driven, all that matters. I'm so busy with my work. At the end of the day, this boy scores this much. So that becomes a worry because that takes into the future. Then it's going to grow up to be like a useless, the imagination strike it further.
In fact, that's a strange part. Actually, we should be much more adventurous, much more able to go and find new ways to see how we can bring to fruition the talents of our children.
All right, we're going to move to our next hot take, okay, which is
Okay.
the move away from an examination-based education model is hampering learning and development amongst our students. Okay, so parents think that if we don't focus on exams,
Okay.
what are we aiming for? What are your thoughts, Suhaimi?
This is Sambar Blachan question, man. Very hard. Wow, this is totally like, I can't even think on my toe right now.
Okay,
I don't know
let's
what
ask
to
Jean
think.
first. What do you
Yes,
think?
both an educator and a
Ask the
parent.
psychologist.
Yes, the educator and the parent. I think I feel that tension, right? I mean, I love the feedback that their teachers are giving to the students right now. No, now they still have assessments. They still have regular assessments, but instead of saying, this is your grade, you're ranked what in class, increasingly the teachers are saying, oh, look, you've progressed in your journey. You have a little bit more to go. Keep trying this. Did you notice that, since the last assessment, you've mastered more words? And that's A** in psychology theory. We say, wow, that's, the correct way of doing feedback, what a psychologist would give. But at the same time, I get the same sense of parent anxiety as you. There is still that high stakes PSLE at 12 years old, and society hasn't changed that much.
No.
So the employers are still going by very clean, okay, what grade do you graduate from? What's your GPA? I'm going to put your starting salary with that in mind, so it's institutionalized. So as much as our psychology theory would say that, that's the best way to give feedback and learn, there's still some things that are institutionalized.
In fact, I would say the following things about exams because this came up from one of the questions I was asked in Parliament.
Yeah.
It's not so much as whether we have exams. The question is, what do we test in an exam? And how do we test? When do we test? What's the purpose of all this? You see, in the past, I think a lot of the exams were very much on, hey, do you know your fundamentals? 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, if I say I mix red color with blue color, what color will you get?
Purple.
Purple.
I mean, very
Well
good.
done.
I still remember my PSAT results.
But you see, to me, some of these things are what I call fundamentals.
Right.
We really need to help our children frame tomorrow's challenges and then help them to figure out a way to gather those information, make sense of it, and come up with creative solutions. That's going to be the real world. When you
Okay.
go out to work,
You don't have a 10-year series at
you
work.
don't have a
huh?
10-year series at work, right? Your boss is not going to ask you to solve yesterday's problems with yesterday's solutions, right? Your boss is trying to really go and look at you and say whether you are able to gather the new information and do something new. So I think the kind of skill sets that we need for exam is certainly going to change. But having said that, then I ask the educators, I say, how are you prepared to set these questions that don't yet have answers? In fact, in many societies, the parents are more concerned with what questions the children ask than just what answers they give. So I think we need a balance of that. Of course, we need to give the answers to the known questions and the known answers. But having said that, we need to go beyond, which is really that curiosity to explore something new and to try and come up with something new. So I think for the exam itself, if it's done well, it actually hones a new type of skill sets for our people. But if we're just getting people to regurgitate yesterday's answers and just by pure rote memory, I don't think that's going to work. And I don't think that's going to do us any good.
So it's going to be a different kind of system preparing this generation, hopefully, for the global stage, right?
So the other perspective of exam is that, you see, sometimes we look at exam as trying to sort people out. And then there's a certain stigma that comes with it, right? But what if we think of it another perspective? Even if we sort people out, it is to allow us to apply the correct resources to help our people to learn in the next phase. So for example, in a PSLE, people say, oh, I want to go to this school. I want to go to that school. This school is a good school. I say, yes, this school is a good school. But is this school the best school for you to bring out your abilities? We need to know our children, their interests, and see how to put them in a place where it best help him or her to excel. I think that is important. Then we move away from this stigmatization of trying to sort people according to abilities, and because of that, then they get a certain mark for the rest of their life. And this is what we mean by continuous meritocracy. In the past, people tend to have this idea that, if I take one exam, whether I do well or don't do well, then my whole life will be determined by that one exam. But you look at all of us, I'm sure you didn't top all your A-level, O-level and whatnot, but you are still successful.
Some I top, some I topple over.
We certainly did not go and top every course and whatnot. But that doesn't mean that we are not contributing members of society. That doesn't mean that we have no abilities that can play our part in society. So, once we change our perspective to be so judgmental just by one single matrix, then I think we are less stressed.
But how are we changing that? How?
So we are starting even from school. You
Yeah.
see, today we have full subject-based banding, study each according to their own abilities in the different subjects. Now, of course, it takes more resources because it's scheduling and so forth. But it makes the child realize that, hey, I may be good at one thing, but that doesn't mean that I'm good at everything and I shouldn't be complacent. On the other hand, if I'm weak at one thing, that doesn't mean that I'm weak at everything and I shouldn't be demoralized by this. So we want every child to understand that you have your unique strengths and abilities. We want all the families to understand that their children all have different abilities and we should try to affirm them in the best possible way to bring out the best in them, rather than to reduce them to a single digit, a single grade point, and as if that will define them for the rest of their life.
Are we moving down that right path? Is there another solution?
Well, I think one point that, I'm really encouraged by is that, this idea that you don't stream people into different pigeonholes so quickly. And, one thing I'm very passionate about is this idea of social mixing, right? I often tell this story of where meritocracy has its promises as well as its pitfalls, how complex it is. I once supervised many high school students in year-long research projects. And one year in the symposium, this girl spoke and she handled the same course readings that I was teaching my university students, and she handled them so well that I brought her to my university class and asked her to teach my students. So I had clearly thought the world of her. But later I discovered, a little bit more about her story, and I realized that, when she was growing up, her parents often left them in the library to go and run other errands. And I guess, the remarkable thing is if I were there, I'll probably go McDonald's and then, slack off or go and play. But she read. And she read and she read. And so, by the time she had to write essays in school, the teachers thought that she was plagiarizing the stories because they were so excellent. And then they realized, no, this girl can really write. And so, they called the Ministry of Education and they personally, this is one thing you cannot do in any big country. They personally mentored her and made sure she got the opportunities in life. But however, I am still a bit curious because, the elite schools still sound like they're still going to be the crazy competitive schools where, parents try very hard, send all their kids from young to gymnastics classes by the time they're age 2 or something to try to get in. And then you still have those silos and almost like two different models coming up.
But that's where I think we have to be very careful because all of us as parents, if we try to hothouse our children to go into a certain track, which may not be suited for them, actually, in the long run, we might be doing more harm than
Yeah, it's
good.
detrimental, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think, for some of us, like I know of some parents already planning the kid who is 2 to go to this school and doing all that they can. Moving near lah, wala, this lah, call up.
The famous word is for your own good.
Who's good? Who's the your? Me or you know what I mean? At
But
the end of the
I
day.
have also
That's the
seen
thing.
very sad cases whereby, as Hossan was saying that, people move house and try and get into these so-called popular schools. But in the end, the children don't thrive. And I've seen people, in primary 2 decided to opt out.
Yeah.
And the saddest thing for me is that instead of nurturing the curiosity, that desire to learn in the child, we have just snuffed out the child's sense of
the
passion to learn. And they are just in the wrong environment. It's always, yes, this is a good school, but is this school good for your child?
All right, it's fantastic that we're talking about how we equip our kids, our school-age students with skills for the world. Now, we need to also turn our attention to people who are already in the workplace. And there's quite a lot of emphasis on lifelong learning. And I understand that this is a point of passion for Suhaimi, who has now got, a bachelor degree. And of course, Mr. Chan, you're also very passionate about this, okay? But before we talk about that, let's have a look at our next hot take. Lifelong learning is pointless because, academic curriculum can never catch up with the ever-changing requirements of the workforce. So you all go and study for what? Suhaimi, why?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the fundamental point that we discussed, and I think I brought it on the table that, learning has to be something that you enjoy. And I think we all agree that it is something that it's not forced upon. And I think the idea of actually going to school is much more than just memorizing textbooks and, for certain formulas. So to me, is like, I think the journey that I took on was like, we came up from the era where everything is comparable. Just like sports, it's like this guy, he went to NUS first and then this guy. So I was at the point of junction where I had to decide to should I take on this career after national service? Because this opportunity to me is like, I got the whole of the microphone for the radio show. So it's like, do I take this on or do I follow my friends? So then I decided at that point in time, okay, never mind, I'll go on with the career. And then bye-bye friends. So they went on for their further studies. And then I thought maybe, okay, after that, I go and study, I can have my own money and continue my study. But having said that, it's not really easy because I think at that time, I dropped out 3 times. I'm not ashamed to say that because
You mean you studying
studied
theatre or
went to
film?
university between when I was working at
okay, so you
radio.
did try before.
I did,
Okay.
So I would drop out 3 times,
Okay.
and then sometimes I felt like at that time, it's like 3 times drop out, and then I felt like it's totally useless. This is not going anywhere, and then suddenly sometimes you make yourself feel better by reading books about people who didn't make it, like Bill Gates. He said, hey, like this guy also dropped out, like Robert Kiyosaki, so suddenly you found inspiration somewhere else. But then again, something happened. I was like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, where was that turning point that you said yes?
I think when I decided to continue on, when I start to see my daughter, when she went to NTU and I said a house study, one night, I just came and visit her a little bit at the room, said, under pressure here and stuff like that. Then a thought came to my head, that's the first thing that why would I encourage her when I can become that encouragement? So the encouragement becomes me. So, whoa. I said, So I took on as and of course at the end of the day, it was this is something that I've done many shows, went to so many platforms, crossovers, I went to all languages. And then this is something which was never fulfilled. And I took that as a challenge to myself and her. And I said, let's complete this. And I'll take on this course. And then, of course, when I went on to submit my submission, then they say, at least you're we could put you on a higher speedometer if you have experience of at least minimum 5 years. 5 years.
A fast track degree.
Yeah, so I go okay, went into the 3rd year. I said, not 5 years. I got 32 years of a whole stack of experience if you want. But the beautiful thing is when I went into classes, then suddenly, light bulb in my head. It's hey, wait a minute, this is something very familiar. And what was theory back then, now it becomes something like a story. The minute the lecturer opened up its mouth, I could not only imagine. It's I've seen this, I've touched it. And that was smooth sailing. I looking at my classmates, at the side when the younger ones, they go they're trying to struggle to. It's you don't know what I'm going through.
Pressure them and stress them out.
Yeah,
right?
it's is that so difficult?
I want to ask you, what's your biggest takeaway from your experience?
I begin to structure my brain and then apply it effectively. So I thought I had to go back to school because whatever I learned, street smart, right? And now it's properly structured. So I could think clearly. And that really helps a lot.
I feel like, before this session started, you were actually playing with the microphone, trying to being really curious about how do we optimize this. And I think you embody the curiosity that we talk about, right? That lifelong learning, even before there was the classroom, you were already changing and learning, keeping up to date in many ways.
I just encourage everyone when they read this, right? They say that you can never catch up with the ever-changing requirements of the workforce.
Absolutely.
I just want us to remember this. We are not the only one in the world facing this challenge. Then the question is, how can the academic curriculum catch up or at least don't lag too far behind? And that is where we started all these models to what I call tie up the industry with the academia. We want the frontier knowledge in industry, the frontier business practices to come back to the academia world as soon as possible. Because I always believe, in Singapore, we never compete on the basis of how much resources we have, how many people we have, but we always compete on the basis of how fast we evolve our ideas, how fast we are able to evolve our products and services so that we can have a niche for ourselves in the world. And the way to do that is that we must get our industry and our academia working closely together. So for example, the old way of doing things, supposing you say cybersecurity, how long does it take to create a new course, a new module for cybersecurity to deal with the latest virus and whatnot? In the past, you may take a few months, curate a course, take another few months to train the trainers, right? Or get it approved, train the trainers, then the trainers to train the trainees. So by the time you finish,
New virus.
So today, how do you shorten that cycle, right? So then the only way is that you need to get the practitioners who are at the forefront to come in and teach the people. And then they have this, what we call, instead of looking at the whole degree or the diploma, that module.
Absolutely.
Just that module, how to overcome these challenges in a just-in-time manner. So beyond the first diploma and degree, actually what many of our people need are really just-in-time modules. And we must be realistic, right? All of us are working. It's quite impossible for us to go back to school. So what's the alternative? The alternative is bring the school to the pocket of the adult. Because today with all this internet access, you can, while waiting for the bus, waiting for the train, even have just a bit of downtime, you can read something and learn something. Then the question is, how do we organize ourselves so that we produce all these interesting modules that can allow our people to learn on the move, if you like. Learn anything, anytime, anywhere. So that's how I think we can try to close the gap between what is frontier industry and business practices with what we learn in school. But that also means that we have to keep learning. So the question is, how do we structure our modules in such a way? But there's still a role for people to go back to the school, if you like. If you look at the SUSS model, people go back to school not to listen to lectures. In fact, they listen to lectures in what we call asynchronously. They own time, own target. You read the lecture, you do the submission, you're on your own. But when you go back to school, you learn to interact with people. You learn to solve new problems. You learn to create new solutions. And that's the fun part of learning together. So I think that's the new model that we have to prepare ourselves, prepare our institutions to help our adult learners learn if we are to compete with other people and we're supposed to evolve faster than other people.
I was just going to say that, it's not just that the curriculum is there and we're trying to make it more accessible, but increasingly, our jobs are so fast changing and people change whole industry. I was just going to speak from personal experience. I'm actually leaving education after 35 years in schools and teaching to join the arts sector. And it's completely different and it's completely daunting as well. But it is exactly this kind of lifelong learning attitude that makes me know that I can switch over to another job.
We all have to learn and pick up these new skills, but we didn't pick it up so consciously because someone taught us. We picked it up, I think,
necessity.
Unconsciously, sometimes by necessity, but you have some basics that allow us to pivot
for sure.
and say that. So I remember, when I was in school, I was supposed to study economics. Then I said, I do the minimum necessary to get all my grades. Then I spend time reading other things.
Right.
You might think that they are not of immediate relevance, but sometimes somewhere in life, the idea will come back and say, hey, actually, there's another perspective to this that I never thought of before. And that's where I think, even if we are learning some things that is perhaps not so evident that it is going to be applied immediately, you never know, this cross-pollination of ideas, and it allows us to have these new and more creative ways of looking at the world.
Absolutely, Min Chan. And I just want to tell everyone that I am actually an electronics engineer by training.
No!
On that note, I wish we had more time to chat more about our lives and lifelong learning.
So you can fix the microphone if it breaks down.
I can, but I won't show off right now. Thank you so much, Jean, Suhaimi, Min Chan, for sharing and telling us what's happening under the pillar of Equip. You know what? We're going to have more pillars coming your way and more discussions with community leaders as well as personalities. So if you've got questions or comments, you can always put it down and click on the link below and put it all there for us, okay? And I hope to see you in our next episode.